Hello everyone, welcome to Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. We have a very special episode today. We're going to honor the career of Brigadier General Chuck Yeager. I had the privilege and honor of knowing General Yeager since 1984. I worked with him on a number of different projects, had the experience of flying with him as well, and we're going to pay tribute to a proud career of a pioneer in aviation and a true legend in our industry. I'm holding in my hand a 1948 Air Force Mach meter. It's set to Mach 1. Mach 1 is the speed of sound, and it was named after Dr. Ernst Mach, who was an Austrian physicist who discovered the speed of sound being 760 miles per hour at sea level and 650 miles an hour at 35,000 feet. This is the type of instrument that was on the instrument panel of the Bell X-1 on 14 October 1947, when Chuck Yeager became the first person to fly faster than the speed of sound. We'll talk about the X-1 in a moment. But what you see on the desk here are 5 aircraft models representing 5 different airplanes that Chuck Yeager flew in his career. And we're going to talk about each one. Obviously, the most iconic airplane and the one that he's most well known for is the Bell X-1. This Bell factory model represents the airplane. It was painted orange for high visibility in those days, and then later they discovered that white was actually more visible. The airplane was shaped like a .50 caliber bullet. It was developed, the initial contract was happening actually during World War II, 1943, and by the time the first powered flights happened in 1946, 1947 time frame, the airplane was starting to probe the supersonic region, and they were trying to discover the phenomenon of compressibility. Yeager himself said when he was flying the P-51 in World War II in a dogfight, the airplane would get up to Mach 0.7, 0.8, and would start to buffet. They'd lose control effectiveness. Sometimes they'd lose complete control of the airplane. And so they needed a program to discover what was happening with compressibility. And the secret of the X-1 was its rocket engine and the fact that it was built sturdy enough to withstand the G-forces and compressibility forces on the airplane, which allowed Yeager to become the first supersonic human. Another airplane in Yeager's career, which deserves mention, is an evolution of the X-1, and that's the Bell X-1A. This is an airplane that had a longer fuselage for a little extra fuel, had a military type canopy, as you see here in the photos of the model and the actual aircraft. And let's talk about the X-1A for a moment. In 1953, toward the end of the year, the world was getting ready for the 50th anniversary of the Wright brothers flight, December 17, 1903. And so toward the end of the year, there was a tremendous push for man to achieve Mach 2, twice the speed of sound. And the rivalry between NACA, then NASA test pilot Scott Crossfield, and Chuck Yeager is legendary. Scotty was flying the Douglas Skyrocket, and Yeager had the X-1A, and there was this race to see who was going to be the first to Mach 2. That honor went to Crossfield on November 20th, 1953, when he flew Mach 2.005 in the Douglas Skyrocket. A little less than 3 weeks later, Yeager was launched in the X-1A from the B-29 mothership and flew the airplane to Mach 2.44. So in the history books, Crossfield is credited as being the first man to fly Mach 2, and Yeager is the first man to fly faster than Mach 2. But something happened on that flight. At an altitude of approximately 73,000 feet, the X-1A exceeded its control authority at that speed and tumbled out of control in what they call the inertia coupling phenomenon, where the forces acting on the airplane overwhelmed the ability for the control surfaces to control it. And so the airplane tumbled out of control on all 3 axes down from 70,000 feet. The gyrations were so violent that Yeager's helmet cracked the canopy. Thankfully it didn't let go, because that would have been pretty serious. But wearing a pressure suit, he was able to get down to thicker air, and in the mid-30s, Yeager was able to put the airplane into an inverted flat spin. And from this he was able to recover and get the airplane upright, recover from the spin, And at an altitude of 23,000 feet above Tehachapi, California, which is a good 40 plus miles away from Edwards, he was able to bring that airplane in for a landing on Rogers Dry Lake successfully and save the airplane. That is one of 5 different times that Yeager dealt with a situation that would have been a fatal accident to any other pilot. Yeager attributed his experience in his career and the success of his career to the fact that he flew literally every day. What is phenomenal is you think of he flew the X-1, he flew this, he flew that. There were days where he might have flown a combination of the airplanes you see here on the desk. He might have flown the X-1 early in the morning and then hopped in an F-86, flew the B-51 later that day, Beechcraft T-34, any number of airplanes, because that's his job as a test pilot. And he said to me more than once, he said, we were having too much damn fun to realize we were making history. And this was the job of the test pilots of that era. It was the golden age of flight test. And as I said, Yeager was the premier test pilot of that time and contributed so much to aviation history. Let's take a little more in-depth look at some of these airplanes that Yeager flew. Let's talk about the Bell X-1 in a little more detail. The secret to achieving supersonic flight lay in the discovery that the separate horizontal stabilizer and elevator was creating a problem at about Mach 0.8 to 0.993. They were getting into serious buffeting, and it was flight test engineer Captain Jack Ridley, one of Yeager's best friends, who discovered that if they locked the horizontal and the elevator together, they could create what would be called an all-flying tail. They would fly the airplane using the trim of the horizontal stabilizer with the locked elevator, and that created its own, what would be called a stabilator in today's parlance. But that allowed the airplane to achieve controllability past 9.3. And as Yeager described it, once they went supersonic, he got full control back, all the buffeting stopped, and that was the secret, which remained a classified, highly classified fact for the better part of a year. But this led to the discovery of this engineering process for designing the tail of the airplane, and that's what led to the success of the North American F-86. The original XP-86 flew with the split tail, as they were called, the fixed horizontal and movable elevator, and when the single-piece all-flying tail was fitted to the 86 and also the Republic F-84F Thunderstreak, the performance was increased dramatically, and that's what gave the F-86 such an advantage during the Korean War against the MiG-15. With Yeager's accomplishment in the Bell X-1 on 14 October 1947 being one of the most epic moments in aviation history, I thought we'd spend some time and discuss the mission. And what I'm holding in my hand is a copy of the flight report that he wrote after the supersonic flight of 14 October. It was the 9th powered flight of the airplane. As is done in flight test, the record was achieved in small increments. They went to Mach 0.6 and 0.7 and eventually worked up to Mach 1. In 1997, the 50th anniversary of that flight, I was honored to be commissioned by General Yeager to create a painting that would depict him landing the X-1 with the FP-80 photo nose Lockheed P-80 chase plane, which, by the way, may come as a surprise. It was flown by then First Lieutenant R.A. Bob Hoover, who later went on to North American and great fame as the world's greatest aerobatic pilot. Yeager and Hoover were best friends in those days, and in 1997 they were still the best of friends. And the two of them together joined forces to allow me to create this image, which you see here. The title was, "Hey Pard, You'll Get a Free Steak at Poncho's Tonight." Poncho Barnes, who had the Happy Bottom Riding Club, the watering hole up there at Muroc at the time for all the test pilots, was well aware that the civilian test pilots were being paid huge amounts of money to do literally the same types of flying as the military pilots, who were receiving, I believe Yeager said he was making about $245 a month at that time. And so she wanted to honor the military pilots and basically made the offer that the first military pilot to fly supersonic would get a free steak at Poncho's Happy Bottom Riding Club. And so when Hoover keyed the mic that day and said, "Hey Pard, you'll get a free steak at Poncho's tonight," he was telling the world that Yeager had gone supersonic. On the morning of 14 October 1997, General Yeager, accompanied by Bob Hoover, recreated that exact moment in time 50 years earlier when Yeager made the first supersonic flight at Muroc. At Edwards Air Force Base during the annual air show, Yeager flew an F-15 named Glamorous Glennis, and he was accompanied in the air, chased by an F-16 flown by Jimmy Doolittle III with Bob Hoover in the back seat. And at exactly 10:45 in the morning at 35,000 feet, they boomed the base and went supersonic. The F-15 actually trailed a bit of fuel so that the spectators at the air show could see the airplanes at altitude. And it was a momentous moment, realizing that 50 years to the moment, 50 years earlier, Yeager had become the first supersonic pilot in history. It was really a great honor to see the two gentlemen together. General Yeager was recalling all the stories. Bob Hoover still called him Hey Pard. And it was a joyous experience as the two gentlemen signed lithographs of the painting that were created later on. I guess the most memorable aspect of that was realizing that these two iconic figures represented so much in aviation history and had accomplished so much together. 50 years later, that respect was still there, and it was really an honor and a wonderful, wonderful project. I'm holding in my hand a factory model from the Martin Company in Baltimore, Maryland, of the Martin XB-51 medium bomber. You notice that it has a fighter-like cockpit and windshield canopy arrangement. The bombardier was seated down below inside the fuselage. And it's a tri-jet. It's got two forward engines and one in the tail. It was powered by the General Electric J47. And the tail engine, it's not showing on the model, but there was a fairing that rotated 180 degrees to form a streamlined cover for the center intake when the center engine wasn't being used for powering the airplane. It was a beautiful swept wing design, very clean. As I mentioned, was one of Yeager's favorite that he ever flew. But this model is a beautiful representation of the airplane. As large as it was, Yeager said it handled just like a fighter. And it was in the movie Toward the Unknown. There's some stunning in-flight footage with an F-100 chase. But again, just look at the beautiful lines of this airplane. And the model is very lightweight, possibly balsa, and beautifully crafted at the Martin factory in Baltimore, Maryland. What you see here is a large-scale F-86 Sabre cast in metal and fully detailed. I'm going to show you the bottom. Look at the landing gear detail on the wheels and tires. Those are rubber tires. Stunning detail on the model. The control surfaces actually move on the wing, and you'll notice, as I was mentioning about the all-flying tail, this model is actually equipped and shows how that works as the single tailplane moves up and down. It's a fully detailed cockpit. You can see here the ejection seat and side panels and instrument panel, and then of course the machine gun ports on the nose, and it just looks like I'm holding a miniature F-86 in my hands. The F-86 was manufactured at Inglewood, California. It was America's premier jet fighter and really the first air superiority jet fighter, which came to fame during the Korean War with a kill ratio of 12-1 against the Soviet MiGs. That's 12 enemy airplanes were shot down for every Sabre that was lost in air-to-air combat. But just a truly beautiful model and an example of the craftsmanship and model work in the early 1950s at North American Aviation. Here we have a exquisite model of the Douglas X-3, and this is a beautiful example of the Douglas models. You notice the beautiful cloisonné Douglas logo on the base, which is covered in a flat black crinkle finish. And then you can see the X-3's stainless steel wings and the beautiful gloss white colors with the windshield actually painted on. As I said, this wasn't one of the stellar airplanes of Chuck Yeager's career, but he was the first Air Force pilot to fly it and had 3 flights in the airplane, exploring the characteristics of what was supposed to be a Mach 2 jet. And it's just a very exquisite airplane in terms of model form, and it was just an amazing example of the futuristic look of jet age 1950s airplanes. The last airplane I want to talk about is the Consolidated Vultee XF-92. Now, it's also known as the Convair XF-92. Convair is a contraction of the name Consolidated and Vultee Aircraft. But Yeager was the first Air Force pilot to fly the airplane. This was a revolutionary design, delta wing. It was not a great performing airplane, but it was the very first member of a very famous family. And we'll be covering the Convair Deltas in a subsequent video. But what you can see here are the beautiful lines. It was very clean. And Delta, of course, stands for the Greek letter, which formed an isosceles triangle. You can see the birdcage canopy and windshield configuration. And this is the early model before they added the afterburner to the J33 engine. But a revolutionary airplane, and Yeager was one of the pivotal pilots in the creation of the airplane's legacy. And that is the last airplane to talk about in the career of Chuck Yeager. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And as always, thank you for watching. And until next time, take care.